Amigas y amigos, dear friends, just a quick word on behalf of the organizers. My name is Ignacio Peiró, and I am the director of Instituto Cervantes in London. Thank you all very much for being with us this evening. In particular, of course, thanks to our guests today, Miluska Benavides and Martín Felipe Castagnet, who I think are joining us from overseas. A big gracias goes to Ben Bollig from the Faculty of Modern and Medieval Languages at Oxford, who will chair this session, and to Alma Prelek of the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, who will read out the fragments and the excerpts selected for today. They are both old friends of the Instituto, and it is a pleasure as ever to collaborate. And last, but by no means least, thank you very much, Valerie Miles, co-founder and editor of the Spanish edition of Granta. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I am glad that after the successful joint launching of the magazine in Madrid about a month ago, there are going to be not a small number of collaborations between Granta and different branches from Instituto Cervantes all over the English-speaking world, from Manchester to Harvard. Something which, of course, highlights how relevant Granta has become, and in particular, this last issue devoted to the best of young Spanish language novelists. It is worth mentioning how the past edition of this series has helped to spread the word about some of the most important fiction writers of Spanish language today. And I'm sure this new edition is called to have an even bigger impact. We are delighted to have with us Miluska and Martín Felipe, both included in this new Granta selection. And I will very briefly tell you a bit about them. Miluska Benavides was born in Lima, Peru. In 2012, she translated Rimbaud's A Season in Hell, and she also published La Caza Espiritual, collection of short stories. Well, that was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. She is now in the process of completing Hechos, the novel from which Kingdoms, which is the fragment that we will read out shortly, has been excerpted. As for Martín Felipe Castagnet, he was born in La Plata, Argentina. He is the author of the novels Bodies of Summer, translated into English by Frances Riddle, and Los Mantras Modernos, sorry. In 2017, he was selected by Bogotá 39, Bogotá 39, as one of the best young Latin American writers. That is all from me, dear friends, but just let me remind you that there will be time for some Q&A at the end of the dialogue. So please feel free to type in the chat whatever question you may have, either for Miluska, Martín Felipe, or Valerie, and then we'll pick them up from there. Muchas gracias. I wish you a very inspiring evening. And Valerie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ignacio. It's a pleasure to be here, a thrill to be here, and to talk about this issue, and to talk with these two writers and hear them in conversation with Ben Bollig. I would like to thank specifically the Cervantes Institute, Luis García Montero, and the marvelous welcome that they gave us in the press conference in Madrid, and also in the different branches of the Cervantes. And it's lovely to be with you, particularly Ignacio, who is, aside from a great director of the Cervantes Institute in London, also a wonderful writer himself. I would like to also acknowledge all of the wonderful encouragement, support, help on the part of other Spanish institutions, such as Acción Cultural Española, AECID, who have, along with Granta, the British magazine, and Granta's team, have all sort of had to take a leap of faith along with us, because as we know, in these making these selections, the process is secret until it's revealed at the end. So that secrecy was kept, and I'm sure Miluska and Martín are probably smiling right now because we had to do that for a very long time. And particularly, I want to thank Sigrid Rousing, who is the publisher and the editor of Granta magazine and of Granta books, for her encouragement. She has been a stalwart supporter of our mission and our work in Spanish Granta for many, many years. She was the one who invited us to do our first Best of Young Spanish Language Novelists issue in 2010, which of course for us was absolutely incredibly exciting to do. It was the first time that Granta magazine ever opened its pages to any other language besides English. So that was for us quite an honor. And I want to thank the Granta team because it's for me been one of the great experiences of my life to work with them. They're a marvelous team. Luke Neyman, Eleanor Chandler, and Prue Rawlinson, and so many people who have been there as we've been working on this together. Finally, I do want to also thank the jury for this issue, who are Rodrigo Fursan, Horacio Castellanos Moya, and Chloe Arigis, who are three marvelous novelists. As a matter of fact, as we were beginning our reading process, Chloe Arigis won the Penn Faulkner Award. So we thank them and we thank her for also, despite having all of the pulls on her time for that, she's continued with us on the jury. There was also Gabby Wood, the incredible Gabby Wood, who is really helped us also she's such an expert in jurying. So it was lovely to work with her, and also Aurelio Major, who is a poet and an editor, and he is the co-founding editor with me of Granta, Spanish Granta. I don't need to explain to anybody what is Granta magazine, because I know everyone knows it's 130 some long year history, and the relevance of the magazine since it was refounded in 1979, and how celebrated the lists are that they do every 10 years since the first list in 1983, the first very famous list. But I might just very quickly let you know a little bit about Spanish Granta. Spanish Granta was founded in 2003, and very, very much keeping on to the same mission that British Granta has since it was refounded in 1983, to open a platform where we would be able to represent the transatlantic conversation in the Spanish. It opened at a time when it didn't seem like there was much of a flow back and forth between Latin American writers and Spanish language writers editorially and in the publishing scene. And we wanted to open that up and give a space for a conversation through the imagination, where we could find ourselves. And it was also meant to open a bridge between Spanish and English, so that we could bring in new writing by exciting young British and American writers, and also share with the British and American writers and readers the work of the Spanish writers, who seemed at a period of time when it was kind of after the boom generation had kind of taken a lot of attention away from maybe the next generation of writers who were coming up. So, but that dialogue that started between Spanish and English was encouraged again very strongly by Sigurd Rausing in a very international way. And slowly but surely, following the Spanish Granta model, many Grantas grew up in different parts of the world. So what began as a dialogue between English and Spanish turned into a conversation on literature. Literature is a phenomenon of language. Literature is more than just the act of reading. It has to be a conversation. And we have magazines as a place where we can tell our stories to each other. And so that's what Spanish Granta wanted to do. And we had a number of, Susan Sontag was one of our first supporters. She actually gifted us a few pieces for our first issues. And then also people like Guillermo Cabrera Infante or Javier Marias or Belén Gopegui, many writers who came close and we were able to work with, Antonio Muñoz Molina, etc. So our first issue, our first list was launched in 2010. And that list, we were lucky, we were able to, we prospected, and many of the writers that we chose on that list have gone on to become prize-winning writers, widely translated, and in some cases household names, such as Samantha Schweblin, or I could say Alejandro Zambra, Andres Barba, Andres Neumann, Paula Olo Isharak, Elvira Navarro, Javier Montes, many of the writers, Federico Falco, who has a novel out, a book of stories out now in Charco Press. So we had to last 10 more years in order to get to this point, and launch our second Best of Young list, which I will allow now you to go in and meet a couple of them and have been talk with them. But before that, I just want to read a very brief paragraph that explains exactly what we were looking for and how these writers had to, the bar that was set for them, so that you can have a sense of the type of writing that we were looking for. We wanted work of the imagination, fiction, consciousness captured on the page, storytelling, no essay, no memoir, no reportage, no selfies with a bit of Photoshop to pass it off as fiction, story that is peeled from the merely testimonial, from the very tiresome use and abuse of the first person, originality, attitude, attitude, writers writing like their lives depended on it, writers writing about things I had no idea I was interested in, writers channeling the worlds of the inarticulate who have not spoken for themselves or whom we cannot hear. Things that are familiar, made strange or re-enchanted, writers like the ones who came before, the ones who didn't know about Instagram, writers who are not readers, but rereaders. So that was the bar we set when we set about looking for these writers. We never imagined in 2010 that 2020 would bring us to be doing this in a time of a pandemic, but it happened, and we forged on, and we selected a list of 25 writers. This list is a very, very wide, very diverse list. There are 4 continents represented, 13 countries. There are significantly more women on this list than on the 2010 list. And there are a number of issues that I'm sure in the conversation are going to come out as they speak. So all I can do now is say thank you very much to Ignacio for inviting us to this evening, to Ben for also inviting us and being here. I would like to also thank our partners, Vintage in Espanol. Vintage is going to be publishing the Spanish edition in the US on May 29th. Also, Audible has done the audio version, and we have paired the voices of the people who are reading each text to the places where the texts are taking place. So it's an extremely varied and very diverse list. It shows all of the richness of the Spanish language. Also, Candaya, who is our partner in Spain and in Latin America, marvelous to work with them. And I want to thank, above all, also the translators, because the translators, we put their bylines also in the Spanish language edition, because they are a part of the creation of this publication. They, I edited both the Spanish and the English. And so after the Spanish pieces were ready for translation, then with the translators, translators are editors also. They see things, they understand things, and they can help also often to have another set of eyes on that text. And so their work also pinged back into the Spanish. And so we kind of refined each one of the pieces thanks to the translators. So they are part of also the Spanish language edition. So thank you very much to them. And I let you now continue, please, and enjoy the conversation. Ben?
Thank you very much, Valerie, for that brilliant overview of the project and its importance. I'm just waiting for Martín Felipe to appear. I can see we've got Miluska with us, and once Martín is here, brilliant. Thank you. Welcome to Miluska. Welcome to Martín. And just a question to start. The last Granta, which I have here from 10 years ago, I found my copy. That came at a moment, 2010, when it felt like the world was discovering or rediscovering Latin American fiction, perhaps on the back of the success of a writer like Roberto Bolaño, for example. But now, 10 years later, do you feel like we're hitting another wave of popularity, importance, and interest? Miluska?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, and thank you all for being with us today. I'm very honored and very happy to join you today. And yeah, it's the presence of Bolaño in the last years is undeniable. But I also would say that the difference between now and the first volume is the growing interest too in the United States of reading in Spanish, and in general the presence of Spanish in the U.S. Now we are seeing more and more a new generation of Latinx writers, and that are also writing in Spanglish, or many other possibilities of Spanish. So now we are facing another reality of the presence of Spanish in the US, and definitely part of the success, I mean, this dialogue that was for a long time, a dialogue between Latin America and Spain now includes the United States. So definitely we are part of that conversation. And right now, many of us has been not only in the States, but also in some centers that now publishes Latin American writers, as New York. And now we have we can say that now we have many centers in Europe, in Latin America, and also in the States. So definitely that's part of the popularity and importance of Latin American writing today.
Thanks very much. And Martín, from your point of view, you've been translated as well yourself, and there's a number of your contemporary Argentine writers who are being translated internationally. Does this feel like a really strong moment for fiction from Argentina and its neighboring countries?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud to be part of the Granta family. For me, it is more than a highlight in my career. I'm truly honored to be here or there. I don't know where I am anymore. And well, I suppose that in Argentina, we believe in the melting pot, in the patchwork, not in heritage or pure breeds. So I believe that Argentinian literature is a great place to be as a writer. We are standing in a middle place, and it is a great place to get ideas. I don't know if this is new. I don't think so. I believe that this is not new at all. But now, as Miluska said, I can see an entire world of translators, especially women translators. Their names are in the covers of our books. And as Valerie said before, their work is very important for us. With my gifted translator, Frances Riddle, she always reads the text I write, and she's part of the process. So I'm thinking that maybe now the visibility is greater than before, but we always had great writers in Latin America and in Argentina in particular.
Thanks, Martin. Reading through the selection, I was really struck by the great variety of styles and voices. And in the introduction, the editors talk about how these are writers who've abandoned any idea of neutral style or auto-fiction. It feels like a very kind of healthy, very varied moment for writing from the region. Miluska, I wonder if what was your impression on reading the other authors here in the collection?
Well, I think it was this specific question, Ben. As I've been like giving a lot of thought, because I think it's a very I think it is not only a phenomenon that affects literature, the quest for new voices. And I think what we are living right now is a shift of many paradigms. And that's what I felt when I was reading the volume as an anthology, right? Because we cannot read the volume just as a group of stories, but of, as like a panorama or what we have right now is just like a picture. And I think what we were experiencing now in the last, I would say what we lived these 20 years at the end of the 20th century. Now we had some doubts before, but now we are completely sure that pandemic brought us the 21st century. And not, but we have been experiencing some changes in political movements and many driven by the presence of internet. And I think one of the most important, paradigm is now that we don't have just one voice, and knowledge is not controlled. Now with the internet, we have more access. Now indigenous writers can publish their own work in the internet, in audiobooks. We have many access to the voices to be heard. And I think this volume might reflect that, how some voices or just, let's say, some echoes or some fragments are need to be caught in order to feel this idea of that we have older paradigms before and now we want the new. For instance, we can talk about the case of feminism, right? Or the case of women writers. Now we have a phenomenon, but it's also a political one. And now we want to hear new voices. We want plurality, multiplicity. And I think the volume abandoning the neutral style might be the reflection of the times we are experiencing right now. The quest for plurality and multiplicity.
Thanks, Miluska. Thank you very much. And Martin, what struck you about the selection of authors who you share this volume with?
Well, I have to say that I couldn't get my hands yet on the volume. Remember that Here we are in the end of the world, or the beginning of it. And the postal service is very slow at the end of the world. So, and I refuse to read in my computer because instead of Borges, I want to keep my eyesight and not to turn blind too young. So I have to say that, because I know much of the writers in the list, but not with the short stories or fragments, excerpts that they presented.
Well, I hope a hard copy does eventually make its way to you, and so you don't have to strain your eyes. I want to ask a couple of more specific questions to the writers individually now, if that's okay. And firstly, to Miluska, a couple of questions for you. I read your biography and this extraordinary life of travels and migrations and different places and cities. And I wondered what role that plays in your writing. And perhaps if you could say a bit about how you first started writing fiction.
I'm very flattered, Ben, that you mentioned that my life story was fascinating, because I don't see it that way. But I really believe, and I really gave a thought to your question, was that my grandparents' life and my parents' life were a history of migration. And in that sense, that experience, we live our ancestors' history after all, right, might reflect on my writing. So my grandparents, if we define it, in my generation, I can define myself as a product of a long history of migration from people from the Andes and the Amazon to Lima, to this big city. And of course, the life of my grandparents are rooted in the Andes, in both sides of my family. But I was born in Lima, and my experience is completely urban. What I have from that migration stories was the idea of those echoes of places that I didn't know, but I really heard every day. The places where my parents were born, where my grandparents, in which my family really recognized to be part of it. And also this struggle to be part of Lima and to fit into this new society, in new rules, and also the Spanish that we are supposed to speak in Lima. And my grandparents, they and many of them, and not all the four, but they spoke Quechua, and they had to come to Lima, and they had to fit. And so this idea of coming and becoming, right, it's part of their stories. And living in a city, but also listening every day about, where my parents were born. Their stories were part of my everyday life. And now talking about my experience, for me, living in the US was also an important experience of my life, to define myself as who I am, really, and to define my identity in terms of language, of my roots, and also politically. I found there, intellectuals, African American intellectuals, really had a great impact of thinking about who am I, and indigenous intellectuals too. And also to your question about when I started to write fiction, I had never thought about that until that moment. And I think it was, I started to write fiction when I was in elementary and high school. Those contests in Peru. I don't know if Argentina, Martín too, we are like, these teachers are obsessed with composition assignments, and the class of lenguaje, and they are so obsessed with that. They may organize prizes and contests. And I think I started there. And I was in high school, I had really wonderful teachers that said, you should be doing this. And I think that was the point. But I have always loved to tell stories. Not only tell stories, but retell stories. Stories, that I heard when I was a kid, and then tell them again. And I think that was, for my grandparents and people around. And I think that was the primeval way to become a fiction writer.
Thanks, Miluska. And actually, all of that that depth of storytelling and of story retelling, I think, comes out in the stories, because on the one hand, I find your style quite sparse. It's not elaborate. It's not Baroque in any way. But at the same time, the stories have this tremendous depth to them. There's a lot going on there below the surface. I wondered, how do you imagine these characters? How do you imagine these worlds and then put them into fiction?
Most of the materials that I work with in fiction, they come from stories. As you said, it's like third level, second level stories. Because when you talk to someone here around, like they might say, so I heard this story, did you know that? I'm very interested about that, going in the streets and listening, even when I go in public transportation. Well, right now, for me, that was also a problem. But mainly the stories come from first like heard from the first, maybe I know someone and I might talk to that person. I was yesterday, on Monday, I was in the line waiting for my father to get the vaccines. And then, all the people, I started to listen to all the people. So that's the first, the main material I work with, or I try to work with. The other one, the material I am very interested. I really love to read history books. But I'm very interested in those, what Carlo Ginzburg will call, those micro histories. When I read sometimes some kind of history books, then there might be a line, just a line that says, so it's, let's say a person did something, but he's not part of that monumental history. He's just, it can be, a footnote in that section. And that might spark a beginning of a story that I might connect with what I know and I heard. So I really love, now that you mentioned about death and the quest for death, can be that, like, to work in a voice that can really capture the way stories were told in a primeval moment, like myth, and when that story has some kind of the sense of being heard, it produces a moment of that you are knowing something, and I think that's the flavor of myth, right? That you are reading or listening to something that has really some knowledge in there, that it doesn't belong to one person but to a community. I'm really interested in working in that process. Interested, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, and just a couple more questions that I wanted to ask, the things that really interested me about your work. You seem very interested in both labor, work, the world of work, and also nature. I'm thinking, for example, in one of the part 2 of Mayor Sonido, or in Kingdoms, the way extractivist industries are represented. So I wonder if you could say a bit about your depiction of human work and our relationship with nature in your writing.
Nature and religion, they are both definitely like some frame in which I see human life operating. But first I will refer to labor, and I think labor...
Paused.
Sorry? Pardon?
You paused for a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I did. That's, yeah. I was, can you listen now?
I think we're okay, carry on.
Good. I think now it's think it's what the internet connection problem. So, well, I think they are both. They are labor, nature, and religion are connected. I really thought at the first. I think I can answer the question referring to the three of them. And I'm interested in labor as being part of how humans can be part of history. For me, I see that's how I see labor. I mean, your presence in society, in community, and to do history through your hands. I'm most of all interested in manual labor and how you. And I think I don't know if you can recall the reflection on Coitzia's Disgrace, and there were some pages, and the character was obsessed for designing a chair. And that really connected to the way I see people work around here, I mean, around where I live. And this manual work really is really, for me, fascinating. And because of my family history too, my grandparents used to work in manual work. And I am just, one of the youngest generation that can work, not without the manual work, but I'm really obsessed with that. But I mean, if I really give a thought about this, I would say also your presence of history. And the presence of history of labor in Peru specifically is the fact that most of the silenced because it was subordinated, it doesn't appear in the official history, is the history of labor movements. But as I said before, I'm not interested in the monumental history. I'm more interested in how you connect with nature and with nature through many human activities. For me, labor is also a connection to nature because you work the land. In the case of the mines, you go and work with the mountains. And that relationship to the religion, the relationship Indian, in the case of Runa, people in Quechua, people from the Andes, they interact with mountains is definitely not the same as we see mountains for being for the mines, right? So these layers of complexity, I think labor, the history of labor allows me to go deep into the history of my country. Peru is also the place of mining. So it's a place of mining, but my focus is more to see mine activity as labor and also dealing with nature. And in the case of religion, it's also part of the history of everyday life here. We are a Catholic. I don't know if that was the case of Martín Felipe, but I was raised Catholic by my parents. And even we can have secular practices. We are living in this version of Catholicism that are very local, right? My practice of Catholic, Indian Catholicism, maybe, right, here in Lima. But for me, mostly, I am very interested in religion because I read also a lot about religion. Is that religion for me is like a set of codes, like a primeval set of codes or rituals that really try to explain the connection between people and communities, people and nature, people and the cosmos. So whenever I read a lot about religion, what I'm really reading is just the history of some communities. And in the case of anthropologists, for instance, when they work in some specific communities and they call myth, what they call myth are really calling some kind of first let's say first history that were circulating in their communities. It's not just it's some fantasy, or it's an interpretation of reality. So I'm interested in religion in that sense. And now, of course, we have lost the codes, or we cannot understand those codes or those symbols. But those symbols are really powerful, and they bring some meaning. So I'm captivated by that. And in the same way that art plays now a role, right? A role of symbols that can sometimes depict some reality, but maybe some kind of reality that was lost. For me, the work of art and fiction is to recover or to capture again that lost meaning that was there in a primeval moment. And for instance, paying attention to Indian practices or in religious practices or Catholicism allows me to see through that. It's like to watch something, like a piece of something. I think we are really living in a world of like, I wouldn't say ruins, but fragments, echoes, and whatever it's really around, I really like I really expect to grab.
Thank you, Miluska. That's fascinating and a real insight into your work. And hopefully we'll have time. We'll hear you again later, reading from your work, and then a translation from read by Alma Prelek. And also, if there are questions on the chat, hopefully we'll have time and we can pick up one or two of those before the close. Thank you again, Miluska. Martin, could you tell us a little bit about your first ventures into writing fiction, please?
First of all, I was thinking between the link between religion and community that Miluska said in the word communion, no? The communion, I think in English,
yes.
The Christian sacrament, no? That represents the body of the Christ body, and it is shared. No, that's very important as a sacrament, and this idea of community, no, is represented in some concrete piece. In this case, the bread. About your question, very alike Miluska, but not in a contest. When I was in the last year of high school, our teachers asked us to write an essay about our town and the capital city. And I did a good job, or that's what I thought. But afterwards, they told me that they expected something more creative from me. And I thought, damn, I would have loved to write a literary essay, not just an academic one. In fact, I can write an entire novel about my relationship with Buenos Aires. And I did it. That was my first novel, which luckily I never sent to any publisher. And well, you see, I am, in the end, I'm nothing more than a kid from a little town who went to the big capital and to seek fame and fortune. And why a novel? I think that, well, I'm very interested in truth. It happens that I find that truth is always closer to fiction than reality. Maybe because truth is very good at hiding. And well, I like the length of the novel instead of short stories, because I feel more comfortable in that breathing, in that long breathing that the novel has.
You also, in the story in the collection, and also in your novel, The Bodies of Summer, you deal with quite big aesthetic, ethical, philosophical questions. So Our Windowless Home, the story in the collection, deals with artistic legacy, artistic quality. Bodies of Summer is about the sort of possibility of downloading or uploading an identity. Do you think that these are the big questions that interest you in your writing?
Yes. Well, I tried to avoid writing about art for many years. That happens often. I think we tend to avoid whatever is closer to us. I felt it was easy. I felt it was a trap. Back then, I chose not to write about books and art until I was sure that I wasn't going to drop to sleep reference here and there. But now I feel at ease. And yes, I believe that the question behind all these short stories I'm writing right now and my novels is the same. What's our legacy? Or if we speak about life and not art, what remains of us when we are gone? That's maybe the ultimate question that's behind my writing.
I really enjoyed the fictional artworks that you invent. It reminded me of Borges's refusal to write novels. He'd rather write short stories about novels. I just wondered if you could say something a bit more about the fictional artwork in your fiction.
Well, that's the idea of behind these stories I'm writing right now. A little history, a micro history, as Miluska said, or private history in the sense, I admire the work of Bill Bryson, for example. The private history of the arts and crafts of an invented region. And the truth is, I'm a honest thief. First, I stole, and only then I write to my victims asking for permission. The story of the transportation map, I heard it in a podcast hosted by a Peruvian author, Juan Sebastián Robles, a friend of mine. And it was the story, I don't remember if a French guy who did exactly that. I went to Lima once to present my books there. I want to say hi to my publishers, my beloved publishers there, Peso Pluma. And I still remember the traffic in Lima. So when I heard this podcast, I knew that I was in front, not just a story, but in front of a piece of art. This idea about working with these little histories around art and craft, this idea was born when I was reading the ending of a Philip Dick novel, Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. And I read in Valerie's introduction, I think, that many writers in this anthology consider Dick as a huge influence, and I'm not the exception. And the ending, the last sentence said, "The blue vase wound up in a private collection of modern poetry. It remains there to this day and is much treasured and loved." That's an amazing ending. The author is paying attention in his very last sentence to something made by the characters during the novel, not to the characters themselves. And it is something that it will outlast them. Last month, I read a short story from a Japanese author, Haruo Sato, about 3 characters who are trying to create a city from scratch. In the end, they only build a miniature city and the blueprints of all the houses. It's very sad when we have to confront our broken dreams, but almost in the post-scriptum of this story, the narrator tells us that in the end they built a house, a single house with these blueprints. But what a house! Because that house will be the house of a great artist. That's the kind of story I like. And well, I'm trying to do it myself, no? to create these very, very little stories about the things that we create, usually with our hands, as Miluska said before. And maybe they are very little and we don't pay attention to them, but they are also art. That's why before I said arts and crafts. It's not because it is a single word, no, the arts and craft movement, like William Morris, but because I truly believe that craft is more art than art itself.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing to find these examples, but it's another thing to be able to really bring them to life, which I think that's something that you do in your fiction. On a slightly different note, you've also written for the cinema as well, and I find your work very visual. I've got really kind of strong images in my head from Bodies of Summer. Could you say a bit about the importance that film has for your work?
Well, I'm a film nerd, so I can't not think in cinema, even if I try. I write using all my senses. I try to write with all my senses, but trying to write the most impossible story for the screen, not the opposite. And it is strange for me that you say that, but well, I heard it before a lot, but in fact, I try to do the opposite. And maybe that's why it became cinematic in some sort of way. I believe that there are senses that are not written enough, like how we touch things. For example, we are in a visual society, but we have our touch screens, mobile phones, no? And I work around these things. But I don't know why cinema come back haunting me. But I suppose that happened with love.
Yes, very much the way. Well, we've been told in the UK that from next week we're allowed to hug friends, but not acquaintances or colleagues. So this will help things in the workplace. Now,
we live in a very bad dystopia.
Yes. And the fiction being more true than truth, I think is very apposite at this moment. Martín, you're going to read an extract for us now, and then Alma is going to read the translation. Alma Prelec, who's joining us now. So Martín's going to read, and then Alma's going to read the translation, and then Miluska is also going to read an extract, and Alma again will read the translation. So for now, that's enough for me, and then hopefully there'll be time at the end to pick up some questions from the public from the chat. So Martín, over to you.
Nuestra casa sin ventanas. Había sido la sorpresa de su vida. Éufrates era todavía una escultora joven, ya con seguidores, prometedora, pero no se sentía consagrada. Sí había logrado establecerse económicamente y mudarse a esa casa a los pies de la montaña, a espaldas del pueblo donde había nacido. Cada tanto recibía la visita de amigos talentosos, de posibles compradores, incluso de alumnos que viajaban hasta la ciudad más cercana para tomar clases con ella. Pero nada la preparó para esa visita. En todo el portento no había mejor actor ni actriz que Chairo. Ninguna estrella en ascenso se comparaba a la leyenda del viejo actor y su aura de zorro. Éufrates lo había visto varias veces en escena, en el corto tiempo que pasó de joven en la capital, cuando estudiaba en la Academia de Artes y Oficios. Y ahora se le aparecía en su puerta y le pedía que le mostrara los secretos de las estatuas. La primera vez que lo recibió no supo qué ofrecerle. Ella nunca tomó alcohol, así que le sirvió un vaso de la sidra que fabricaba el vecino. Chairo le pidió vaso tras vaso y se terminó llevando la botella de culo ancho. Nunca le explicó el porqué de la visita, solo que necesitaba conocerla en persona. Un amigo, coleccionista, lo había introducido a la obra de ese artista joven e incluso había visitado de incógnito una pequeña muestra en una galería metropolitana. Éufrates le mostró su horno y su fragua, su depósito y su colección personal. ¿Querés que te regale una?, le ofreció ella, borracha de felicidad. Chairo largó una carcajada y a ella se le quedó grabada esa risa franca. «Puedo comprarla», aclaró serio él, y la escultora insistió: «¿Te la regalo o nada?» «Quizás otro día», concedió el actor. 7 años después, una voz desconocida anticipó la llegada de Chairo para ese mismo día. La escultora bajó corriendo la colina y en vez de dejar la botella vacía, golpeó la puerta hasta que el vecino, algo asustado, interrumpió su siesta. «Decime que todavía te queda una botella de sidra», le rogó. Era el final de la primavera, pero Éufrates se volvió con las últimas 3 botellas, 2 en la mano y una debajo de la axila, y las enfrió en la heladera. Esa noche volvieron a tomar sidra. El abogado que acompañaba a Chairo se negó con una sonrisa, pero sí aceptó sentarse. Las rodillas no le resistían. Chairo, en cambio, apenas si se mantuvo sentado. Ahora no», le decía su abogado. Éufrates no entendía nada y pensó: «Quiere comprar una de mis estatuas». «No, las quiere comprar todas». El viejo le explicó: «El anillo de Ruirbing es un premio que se le entrega al mejor artista vivo, y yo ahora te lo entrego a vos. Es un premio secreto, y nadie debe saber de su existencia, salvo la fundación que lo financia. Desde ahora en adelante no te va a faltar dinero. Tu único trabajo es seguir dedicándote a tu arte, y, cuando llegue el momento, entregárselo al único artista que creas que de verdad lo merezca». El abogado sacó la cajita de su bolsillo y la abrió. Un mes después, Chairo estaba enterrado en su casa sin ventanas. El día que le llegó la noticia, Éufrates se probó el anillo por primera vez. Al día siguiente convocó a Aide al atelier. Su aprendiz era una buena chica, aunque le escondía las reseñas negativas. A Éufrates le causaba gracia. El crítico que había destrozado su última exposición era un bebé de pecho. Le faltaba tanto por aprender de la vida que la escultora leyó la reseña como una vindicación. «Necesito agendar una reunión con la maestra Brasi Siraise», le indicó. La aprendiz estaba acostumbrada a los nombres importantes, pero aún así le llamó la atención el pedido. Éufrates no quiso explayarse. «Es como una entrevista de trabajo», le explicó a medias. Más tarde, Aide asomó la cabeza. Brasi había aceptado. Cada vez tenía menos fuerzas, así que programaron la visita para esa misma semana, en el que terminó siendo uno de los días más fríos del año. Esa mañana se despertó con un nudo en la mitad de la espalda. Fue hasta el tambo. Sus pisadas aplastaban la nieve y la hacían crujir. La suciedad le dio algo de vergüenza. Mientras desayunaba, miró los utensilios y la vajilla con la que comía, como si los viera por primera vez. Un pato entre los juncos, la abeja en el tenedor. A la leche le flotaban grumos de grasa. La parte más rica, decidió. Aide había tenido la idea de agendarle un desayuno con Brasi, pero Éufrates se levantaba demasiado temprano, cuando todavía era de noche, y no iba a esperar su llegada. 15 minutos después, estaba vomitando el desayuno en la bacha de la cocina. Pero tenía que juntarse con Brasi. No podía dejarle el anillo sin estar segura. El viejo había puesto sus expectativas en ella. Se había esmerado en estar a la altura. Aunque después, Éufrates pensaba: ¿estar a la altura de qué? Y rechazaba esa idea simplona que ejercía tanto influjo sobre ella. Y luego volvía a preguntarse: ¿pero lo logré o no? ¿Pasé la prueba o caí en la trampa? Abrió la canilla y se enjuagó la boca, Se cambió la camisa y se sentó en el atelier a esperar que llegara su invitada.
Thanks. It's so wonderful to hear this. Felipe. Well, I'll try to follow now. This will be the same excerpt from translated by Francis Riddle. It had been the biggest surprise of her life. Euphrates, Euphrates, was still a young sculptor, promising with some followers, but not yet widely acclaimed. She had managed to become financially stable and moved to the house at the foot of the mountain, with its back to the village where she'd been born. Every once in a while, she received visits from talented friends, possible patrons, even students who traveled from the nearest city to take classes with her. But nothing had prepared her for that visit. In all of Portland, there was no actor better than Chairo. No rising star could compare to the legend of the seasoned performer with his fox-like presence. Euphrates had seen him so many times on stage during the short while she lived in the capital as a young artist, when she studied at the Academy of Art and Design. Now here he was at her door, asking her to show him the secrets of her sculptures. The first time he visited, she didn't know what to offer him. She didn't drink alcohol, so she served him some of her neighbor's cider. Chairo asked for seconds and thirds and ended up taking the large jug home with him. He never explained the reason for his visit, just that he needed to meet her in person. A collector friend had introduced him to the work of this young artist, and he had even attended, incognito, a small exhibit of her work at a metropolitan gallery. Euphrates showed him her kiln and her forge, her workshop and her personal collection. "Would you like a piece?" she offered, drunk with happiness. Chairo let out a long peal of laughter that would remain etched in her memory. "I can pay for it," he clarified seriously, and the sculptor insisted. "It's a gift or nothing. Maybe another day," the actor said. 7 years later, an unfamiliar voice called to announce the arrival of Chairo that evening. The sculptor ran down the hill, but instead of leaving the empty bottle, she knocked on her neighbor's door until she woke him from his nap, startled. "Please tell me you have some cider on hand," she begged. It was the end of spring, and Euphrates returned home with the neighbor's last 3 bottles, one in each hand and another tucked under her arm. She put the bottles in the fridge, and that night they once again drank cider. The lawyer politely refused a glass, but did accept the chair Euphrates offered. His knees couldn't hold out. Chairo, on the other hand, could hardly remain seated. Not yet, he said to his lawyer. Euphrates had no idea what was going on, and she thought, he wants to buy one of my statues. No, he wants to buy all of them. The old man finally explained. The Ring of Rirving is a prize given to the best living artist, and now I will hand it down to you. It's a secret prize, and no one must know of its existence except for the foundation that finances it. Your only task is to continue dedicating yourself to your art, and when the time comes, hand the ring down to the only artist you truly feel deserves it. The lawyer took the little case from his pocket and opened it. A month later, Chairo went to live in his windowless home. When Euphrates received the news, she tried the ring on for the first time. She called Aide into the studio the following day. Her apprentice was a nice girl, even though she had the habit of hiding the negative reviews. Euphrates found it funny. The critic who had picked apart her last exhibit was a newborn babe. He had still had so much to learn about life that the sculptor took his bad review as a triumph. "I need to schedule a meeting with Maestra Brazzi," she told her apprentice. Aide was used to important names, but this request surprised her. "It's a kind of job interview," she said vaguely. Later, Aide poked her head in. Brazzi had accepted. Euphrates was feeling increasingly feeble, so they arranged the visit for that very week, on what ended up being one of the coldest days of the year. That morning, Euphrates woke up with a knot in the middle of her back. She went out to the barn, her footsteps crunching the snow. She was slightly embarrassed by the amount of filth. As she ate breakfast, she looked at the utensils and dishes she ate off of, as if seeing them for the first time. She noticed a duck hiding in the reeds, the bee carved in the fall candle. There were fatty globs floating in the milk, the most delicious part, she decided. Aide had the idea of scheduling a breakfast with Brasi, but Euphrates always got up so early that it was still dark out, and she wasn't going to wait for the other artists to arrive. 15 minutes later, she was vomiting her breakfast into the kitchen sink. But she had to meet with Brasi. She couldn't leave her the ring without being sure. That old man had put his faith in her, and she had risen to the challenge. But then she thought, risen to what challenge? For the first time, she rejected the simplistic notion that had exerted so much influence over her all these years. And so she asked herself, but did I rise to it or not? Did I pass the test or did I fall into the trap? She turned the faucet on and rinsed her mouth out with water, then changed her shirt and sat in the studio waiting for her guest to arrive.
Thank you very much, Alma, for bringing that to life in English after Martin's reading brought it to life in Spanish. That was wonderful. And we're now going to hear Miluska reading her extract and then the translation. So thanks again, Alma, and over to you, Miluska.
Oh, thank you. This is a section of the piece of fiction that I sent. It's called Kingdoms. And now this specific section, an excerpt of that section is called Un hombre singular. Mario Bautista sostuvo el sombrero a la altura de su vientre y se sumergió en la muchedumbre que caminaba hacia el cementerio, acompañando a los muertos con rezos y sollozos. El padre Kardich echó agua bendita a una fila de féretros dispuestos debajo del alto arco de piedra que enmarcaba los funerales de los jóvenes, víctimas del barranco de la curva del Aramati. Del accidente le informaron otros choferes cuando se detuvo en Granta y decidió ir al cementerio a despedirse, aunque sabía que de vuelta a casa de Sebastiana Narváez le esperaría el reproche. Pero ¿cómo no ir?, le aclaró a su madre mientras le servía el caldo hirviente. Y todavía te vienes acá a comer. Anda directo donde la señora, le dijo. Él no hizo caso. Había dejado el camión en la terminal sin siquiera avisar de su salida. Se unió a la larga procesión que serpenteaba por la calle empedrada, la más antigua, por donde dicen que pasó por última vez el brujo de los Andes y las montoneras durante la guerra con Chile, para desaparecer por la cordillera que se empinaba detrás del cementerio. Cuando por fin apareció en la casa de Sebastiana Narváez, las dos hojas del portón estaban abiertas. En el centro del gran patio florecía un alto árbol de flores blancas. Sebastiana lo esperaba con la cara colorada y un fuete que solían llevar los hombres de su familia. Adela también lo aguardaba, aunque prefería no hacerse ver, escondida tras uno de los pilares del patio. Decían casi todos en esa casa, con admiración y amargura, que Sebastiana gobernaba su reino sin ayuda. Tenía 2 hijos a los que había mandado a estudiar a la costa. A su hermano menor lo había destinado a una de sus haciendas venidas a menos para que se hiciera hombre. Revisó uno a uno los sacos de café que había traído de los valles, uno de los pilares de su comercio. Eso decían, y su capacidad de amarrar a los mejores choferes, mientras el resto de los comerciantes seguía contratando arrieros o neófitos, como los que se defenestraron por la curva del Aramate. Ahora tengo un negocio urgente que proponerte para mañana. Más tarde, le dijo a Mario Bautista sin saludarlo, mientras los peones descargaban los sacos y los cargaban al hombro hacia el almacén. Hablemos más tarde, después de la misa. La misa de honras de Justo Narváez, el padre de Sebastiana, se celebró a pesar de las protestas del padre Kardich, quien sugirió posponerla pensando en la borrachera que habría después, en el patio de la casa Narváez, donde se congregarían incluso forasteros atraídos por las noticias. En el servicio, en palabras del padre, el difunto Justo Narváez fue recordado como un hombre singular, un hombre soñador y cosmopolita en esa nada que era Santa Lucía. El padre extendió los brazos e invocó a los santos empotrados en las paredes de la iglesia para recordar a su amigo. Un hombre de gran curiosidad, decía el padre, como las veces en que preguntaba por la naturaleza del reino de Dios, de si se había calculado en números el día de su llegada, de cuán cerca estarían por cumplirse cada una de las promesas del Señor Jesucristo, y de cómo en algún momento se abriría el reino de los vivos y los muertos, y el mundo sería uno. Contó además cómo justo se había vuelto más pío después de una serie de parálisis que no impidió que siguiera preguntando por el Señor. Sola y de negro, Sebastiana, sentada en la banca de madera de la primera fila, asentía. Ni el sermón ni la fiesta pudieron acallar los rumores de cuán extraña había sido la muerte de Justo Narváez. A la salida de la misa, las mujeres murmuraban, luego de darse la paz, de que Sebastiana lo había dejado morir. Ese rumor se hacía cada vez más creíble. Comentaban que poco antes de fallecer, Narváez había cerrado sus minas de plata de Cangallo, asegurando que se había acabado la veta. Decían que era posible que se pidiera al cerro de la mina que ocultara sus minerales o se la llevara a otro lado, tal como sucedió con las minas de una antigua parienta de los Narváez, Catalina Stocuri, quien en su agonía le pidió a un brujo que le hablara a la Virgen para que ocultara el oro de sus minas, y así se pudieran prevenir las desgracias de la codicia. No era coincidencia, susurraban en la iglesia, que poco después de la muerte de Narváez, Sebastiana hubiera traído ingenieros para buscar más plata en Cangallo. Ella sabía de estas y otras habladurías, pero la mujer optó por agradecer en la puerta de la iglesia, estrechando las manos y los antebrazos de los asistentes, gente que había trabajado para ella o le debieron alguna vez algo a su padre.
Gracias, Miluska. Thank you very much. And Alma, please.
Thank you so much, Miluska. And yes, the same excerpt translated by Catherine Silva. Mario Bautista held his hat in front of his belly and plunged into the crowd that was walking towards the cemetery, accompanying the dead with prayers and sobs. Father Cardic sprinkled holy water on a row of coffins placed under the high stone arch that framed the funeral of the youths, victims of the cliff at the Laramati curve. Other drivers had told him about the accident when he'd stopped in Granta, and he decided to go to the cemetery to say his goodbyes, even though he knew that when he returned to the house of Sebastiana Narváez, reproaches awaited him. How could I not go? He said to his mother, while she served him the piping hot soup. And still you come here to eat. Go straight to the señora, she told him. Bautista paid no heed. He had left the truck at the terminal without telling anybody he was leaving. Then he joined the long procession that wound the cobblestone street, the oldest one, where they say Cáceres, the Brujo de los Andes, and his montoneras passed for the last time during the war with Chile, and from there disappeared into the cordillera that rose steeply behind the cemetery. When he finally showed up at Sebastiana Narváez's house, the double gates were wide open. In the middle of the large courtyard, a tall tree with white flowers was in full bloom. Sebastiana, cheeks ablaze, was waiting for him, holding a whip that the men in her family often carried. Adela was also waiting for him, though she preferred to remain unseen, hidden behind one of the pillars in the courtyard. Everyone in the house said, with admiration and bitterness, that Sebastiana ruled over her kingdom without anybody's help. She had 2 sons that she had sent to study on the coast. Her younger brother had been sent to one of the more run-down haciendas in order to make a man out of him. She checked each and every bag of coffee he had brought from the valleys, one of the pillars of her business. This, they said, as well as her knack for hiring the best drivers, whereas the rest of the traders kept hiring novices and muleteers, like the one who drove off the cliff at the Laramati curve. I have some urgent business to propose for you tomorrow. Later, she said to Mario Bautista, without greeting him, while the peons unloaded the bags and carried them on their shoulders to the storehouse. Let's talk later, after Mass. The Mass in honor of Justo Narváez, Sebastiana's father, was held against the protests of Father Cardic, who suggested postponing it because of the drunkenness that would ensue in the courtyard of the Narváez house. where even outsiders would gather, drawn there by the news. In the priest's words during the service, Justo Narváez, the departed, was remembered as a singular man, a dreamer and a cosmopolitan in that backwater that was Santa Lucia. The priest stretched out his arms and invoked the saints embedded in the walls of the church to remember his friend. He was the man of great curiosity, the priest said, who repeatedly asked about the nature of God's kingdom, about whether the actual number of days till his return had been calculated, about when every promise made by our Lord Jesus Christ would be fulfilled, and about how at some point the kingdom of the living and the dead would open and the world would become one. He also talked about how Justo had grown more pious after suffering a series of palsies, which did not stop him from asking questions about our Lord. Sebastiana, alone and dressed in black, sat on the wooden bench in the first row, nodding. Neither the sermon nor the party could silence the rumors about how strange Justo Narváez's death had been. As the women filed out of mass, they whispered, after offering each other signs of peace, that Sebastiana had let them die. The rumor was gaining credibility. They said that shortly before dying, Narváez had shut down his silver mines in Cangallo, claiming the vein was spent. They said he may have asked the mountain itself to conceal its minerals or take them elsewhere, as had happened with the mines of a long-gone relative of the Narváez family, Catalina Altoscuri, who on her deathbed told a brujo to ask the Virgin to hide the gold in her mines in order to prevent the sin of greed. It was not a coincidence, they whispered in church, that shortly after Narváez's death, Sebastiana brought in engineers to look for more silver in Cangallo. She knew about these and other rumors, but she chose to thank people at the door to the church, shaking the hands and the forearms of the attendees, the people who had worked for her or who had once owed something to her father.
Thank you very much, Alma, for that really vivid reading of both of those texts, and for really giving for anyone who isn't a Spanish speaker to get a real sense of the life and the vivacity of these stories. So thank you very much for that, and to Martin and also to Miluska for their readings, for sharing their work in their own voices. We have a bit of time left. I think it would be nice to be able to take some of the questions that we've got here on the chat. I'm just trying to pick out some of these which I think are more relevant to both of you. Yeah, quite a lot of interest from the audience about the question of work and writing as work. So either Martin or Miluska, I don't know who'd like to go first. So somebody says about the physical aspect of holding pen to paper or of touching keys on the screen, and also the question about different types of work as well, about paid labor and unpaid labor and gendered aspects of labor as well. So Miluska, maybe if you answer that first, and then Martin.
Yeah, I think it's a very it's a paid and unpaid labor. It will take us like a lot of time. It's fascinating what we consider labor as commodity. When I think about labor, I don't think it as commodity, but as I said before, an experience between nature and we people, right? But I also, I'm really thankful for that question, because that allows me to speak a bit more about the work of women in the place of monumental history. And I think both Martín Felipe and I are very interested in telling those stories that are part of the microhistory, that the stories that happens inside the homes, but also in the public sphere, but is not told officially. And I absolutely very interested in the work of women. In fact, this excerpt that I read, it's a section, but another section is dedicated to the action of cooking and peeling. I don't know how to call it in English, but in Spanish we call it alberjas. beans. Yeah, I mean, you know, the labor in which you form communities. About what I am very interested is in the idea of how you form communities in the act of labor. It can be community of women in the kitchen that I experience every day. That right when I go, when my grandmother, we used to be with my grandmother. Yeah, so absolutely, is, I won't say paid and unpaid, but I would say not labor as commodity, but another side of labor, this activity that can create spaces in which we can create community among people and also with nature.
Thanks, Miluska. And Martín Felipe, maybe you could say a bit about your relationship, the relationship between writing and work for you.
Writing, I consider writing as manual work in a soft way, in a softer way than other labors. But at the same time, what I was thinking is in which kind of job or labor we don't put our bodies into them. When I wrote these two novels about internet and computers, and from the science fiction perspective, but about our relationship with the internet and our devices, I was thinking exactly that, that we put our bodies to chat with friends or to work, and now with the COVID, that it is visible for everybody that being in front of the computer, you know, and when we have to type our lessons to our students, or to be in front of a camera to teach, we always have to put our bodies into our activities. Of course, I can't pretend that it's the same kind of labor that so many people have to do to survive. But if we think it from the body, our bodies is the only thing we have.
Thanks, Martin. A couple of, I think we're aiming to finish by 8:30, so just time for a couple more questions from the chat. Actually, yeah, a question about the publishing worlds. Martin, perhaps first, could you say something a bit about the publishing world in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, please?
There is a new wave of publishing houses in Argentina, so-called independent publishing houses. That's a tricky word to use, because independent of what? No, but at the same time, it is a way. It's a term we use to separate the work of these titanic publishing houses, Pantagruelic publishing houses that are growing, and they are still growing every day. Every day we see it in the news, in the publishing news. And I am not against the work of these publishers, but at the same time, having publishing your work in a small press is in some ways is we can't consider a champ, no? That we are champing, no? From a small press to a big house, and I don't believe in that idea. This is not a competence. This is not a competence like the Olympic Games, no, where the first place, no, the gold medal winner, no, is above the rest, and you have to champ. No. I believe that there is an environment that is made possible only by the small presses, and literature can thrive in this world in a different way than that if you publish in the greatest publishing houses.
Thanks, Martin. Miluska, could you say a few words about publishing in Peru, please?
I think it's what Martín Felipe described is a continental reality now in places in which are like, I don't know, sieges of transnational publishers. And Lima is one of them, and and the literary scene definitely has changed since their arrival. And it's the same as Martín Felipe described, is the migration from independent jump authors to these houses. And what, in the case of fiction writer, left, and that's not an opinion, that's a fact, left the independent is seen somehow desert. But there is also a flourishing of new literary press houses. It's small and independent. And what I really like to mention is just two cases in Peru that are really, that I think are the more, what we might call the avant-garde, or they are thinking even in writing. I mean, that's poetry. And in the case of Peru, and I know, Ben, you studied poetry too, and in the case of Peru, poetry has been always the tradition. We have Vallejo, it's like a very heavy tradition. But in Peru, young poets are really publishing interesting independent work, and they are having also a circuit of conversations, and I think Christina's question was related to that. I mean, a poet might have loved to answer the question about how do you relate with new ways of expressing your writing, and also there is a new wave, I would say, of independent publishers and editors that are publishing what we call indigenous writers. Now they write in their own languages. They don't want to be translated into Spanish, and there is such a great, I would say, way of movement of recent. For instance, just a little time. It's just the only novel written in Quechua is a Peruvian one. It's by Pablo Landeo. And it was published just a few years ago. And as he published the novel, just completely, totally in Quechua, there are more and more young writers and editorials that, let's say, not editorial, house presses, that they are interested in publishing in indigenous languages. So I just learned Quechua. I've been learning for 2 years, and now I can read them. And I really see how their work is very vibrant, and they can really make an impact in this scene. And if they are being translated into English and into other languages, that I think might change also the panorama, or the actual panorama. And I think that's also a very continental phenomenon. I've seen that in Mexico, in Chile, LOM, the Mapuche poetry is also. I really love the love of work of Elicura Chihuailaf. It's just we are living another moment in which independent presses and independent scene are bringing us this new literature to us, right? So I would say in the case of Peru, it's definitely poetry and these new actors in this scene.
Thanks, Miluska. And that's really interesting. It's really important as well to see some of the first peoples and first languages writing being published and hopefully soon being translated. I just want to say thank you to both of you for your generous answers and for your marvelous readings. Also, thank you to Alma as well for bringing these texts to life. And just before we close, if I don't know if there are, I want to just give the floor to either and Valerie and Ignacio if they just have any closing words for us.
Well, since I am unmuted, thank you very much. Thank you, Miluska. Thank you, Martin, Ben, and Alma. It's been extremely interesting, and I must also say I have enjoyed tremendously the fragments you've read. And thank you, Ben.
Valerie, that might be your opportunity. Ignacio, I hope will come back a second, but Valerie.
Okay, well, yes, well, I just, all I can say is I'm so proud of the writers in the selection. I think, you know, slowly but surely as we're doing events and able to hear them speak about their work, and I just am always excited and surprised, not surprised, but just very, very, I think it's incredible how well they articulate what they're doing, which I think, you know, often it can be that a writer writes, but has a difficult time articulating what their poetics are, what their areas are. And these writers are incredibly articulate in talking about what they're doing and have very clear kind of paths that they're working on. I just want to say thank you very much, Ben. It's been lovely to hear you, and it's been lovely to be part. Also, Alma, it's really, I love to hear the English spoken, you know, read. So it was really beautiful. And thank you, Miluska and Martín Felipe, for being a part of it. It's just, it's very exciting to hear them.
And congratulations on another, you know, wonderful volume. And Ignacio, we have you back. So a final word from our director. Ignacio.
I think he's still.
I think.
No, there we go.
Well, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Well, thank you very much, Valerie, as well. And well, I hope there'll be more of this in the future. That's all from us. Un abrazo. Bye bye. Good night.
Good night.
Done.
Good night, everyone.
Buenas noches.
Buenas
tardes.
Buenas noches.
Gracias.
Buenas tardes.
Hasta pronto.
Y hasta pronto.
Gracias.
Bye.